She does not think of herself as falling behind. She has a job, she pays her bills, she has a small retirement account and a car that is almost paid off and a credit card she has been carrying a balance on for 18 months now. The balance is $4,000. The interest rate is 22.3%. She pays the minimum every month. The minimum does not cover the interest. The balance is growing. She does not check the balance every day because checking it does not change it. And looking at it makes her chest tight in a way she does not have a good word for. She makes $68,000 a year. She is not poor, but she is spending more every month than she was 2 years ago on the same groceries, the same rent, the same gas, the same everything. The number going into her account every 2 weeks is the same. The number going out is bigger. Something is taking money from her. She can feel it. She just does not know the name of it. The name of it is the hidden tax. And it is not one thing. It is a system of 4 overlapping mechanisms, each designed to be legally invisible, politically deniable, and economically devastating to the specific group of Americans who do not own enough assets to benefit from the system that is draining them. The people we used to call the middle class. The people who are now being quietly reclassified as economically anxious, and who are watching their share of American wealth fall to the lowest level ever recorded in the history of Federal Reserve data collection. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what the 4 components of the hidden tax are. You're going to understand the specific number from Federal Reserve data released in January 2026 that tells you the most important thing that has happened to American wealth distribution since the Federal Reserve began tracking it in 1989. You are going to understand why the Yale University Budget Lab, the Tax Foundation, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York all arrived at the same conclusion from 3 different directions in the past 60 days. You are going to understand what 60% of American credit card holders have in common with each other, and why that number is the most important data point in the entire hidden tax story. And you are going to understand what the specific math says about where American middle-class wealth is going in 2026, and why the people who benefit from the system being exactly this way have every incentive to make sure you never understand what I am about to tell you. Let us start with the number, because the number tells you everything. And it was released quietly enough that most of the people it describes most directly never heard it. In January 2026, CBS News reported Federal Reserve data showing that the top 1% of American households owned 31.7% of all U.S. wealth in the third quarter of 2025. The highest share on record since the Federal Reserve began tracking household wealth in 1989. Collectively, the wealthiest 1% held approximately $55 trillion in assets, roughly equal to the wealth held by the bottom 90% of Americans combined. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, told CBS News directly, household wealth is highly concentrated and becoming steadily more concentrated. The wealthiest 1% owns the same amount as the bottom 90%. That is not a statistic about people who made different choices or worked different hours. That is the mathematical output of a system that has been transferring wealth upward for decades through mechanisms so embedded in the architecture of the economy that most of the people being extracted from do not know the extraction is happening. Now let us look at what has happened to the middle, because the 1% number is the headline. The middle class share number is the actual story. Federal Reserve and USAFEX data shows that the 60% of income earners between the top and bottom quintiles, the people economists describe as America's middle class, held 37% of the nation's total wealth in 1990. By 2022, that share had fallen to 26%, an 11 percentage point loss of national wealth share over 3 decades. The top 20% now owns 71% of all wealth, up from 61% in 1990. The top 1% alone drove most of that gain, seeing their share rise from 17% to 26% in those same 3 decades. And this is where the hidden tax becomes visible, because those numbers did not happen because rich people worked harder or got smarter. They happened because the system of value transfer in the American economy is structurally skewed toward asset ownership, and the specific assets that the wealthy own, stocks, financial instruments, private equity, appreciate at rates that ordinary wages and home equity cannot match. The stock market in 2025 returned returns that went primarily to the wealthiest Americans. According to Gallup, 87% of Americans who own stocks are adults living in households earning $100,000 or more per year. The median middle-class household's wealth is concentrated in their home. The home is not a bad asset, but its appreciation runs at a fraction of the rate of corporate equities, and unlike stocks, it generates no income you can reinvest while you live in it. The Urban Institute calculated that in 1963, the wealthiest American families had 36 times the wealth of families in the middle of the wealth distribution. By 2022, they had 71 times the wealth of families in the middle. The gap doubled in 60 years. That doubling did not happen through choices. It happened through structure. And the structure has a name, 4 names actually, one for each component of the hidden tax. The first component is the purchasing power tax. This is the one that the woman with the $4,000 credit card balance is feeling every time she goes to the grocery store and does not know the word for what she is experiencing. Between December 2020 and December 2024, nominal wages increased 17.3% nationwide. During the same period, prices rose by a cumulative 21.2%. That is a 3.2% decline in real earnings over 4 years for the average American worker. Not a dramatic event, not a crisis with a beginning and an end, a slow, continuous extraction of purchasing power through the inflation mechanism, but the inflation number understates the actual damage, because inflation is measured as an average across the entire economy. The specific items that dominate the spending of middle-income households have inflated at rates far above the headline number. Consider the data for a family of 4 between 2001 and 2023. Rent at the 40th percentile rose 125% over those 22 years. Annual health insurance premiums borne by middle-income workers more than tripled. The average price of center-based childcare doubled. Wages for typical workers rose 92% in nominal terms over the same period. The result was a 4% decline in purchasing power for families whose budgets are dominated by necessities. As of March 2026, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data released April 10th, the annual inflation rate was 3.3%, up from 2.4% previously. The Iran war's oil shock drove the March acceleration. Food prices in 2026 are predicted to rise 3.6% overall, with beef and veal up 14.4% year over year as of February 2026. Daycare costs have surged 39% since 2019, according to CARE. 7 in 10 Americans in a 2025 poll said raising a child is unaffordable, up from 58% a year earlier. Healthcare premiums for ACA marketplace plans are projected to rise by a median of 18% in 2026, compared to an average of 7% annual growth from 2023 to 2025. These are not fluctuations. They are structural and cumulative increases in the cost of essentials, and they are compounded by a feature of inflation that the headline number never shows. Prices go up. They do not come back down. A rent increase does not automatically reverse when inflation cools. Childcare prices do not fall just because the CPI moderates. The Fortune analysis of affordability trends published in January 2026 was precise. Shocks to essentials are rarely one-time disturbances. They become lasting additions to the cost of living, raising the baseline from which working Americans make every subsequent financial decision. The purchasing power tax is invisible on your pay stub. It does not show up on any tax form. The government does not send you a bill for it. It simply appears as a growing gap between what the same dollar bought last year and what it buys today. And it extracts more from people whose spending is concentrated in the essentials, where inflation runs hottest, which means it extracts more proportionally from the middle and lower income brackets than from the wealthy. The second component is the tariff tax. This one was exposed this year more clearly than at any point in modern American policy history, because multiple nonpartisan institutions simultaneously calculated exactly what it costs by income level, and the numbers confirmed what economic theory has always predicted. Tariffs are a tax on imports. They are paid by the American entity importing the foreign goods. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's research, American firms and consumers bear approximately 90% of the economic burden of tariffs, not the foreign producers. The tariffs are supposed to target. The Yale University Budget Lab analysis, published March 9, 2026, found that under the current tariff regime, the average household will pay an extra $570 in 2026 due to tariffs. The Tax Foundation, in a March 13, 2026 analysis, arrived at a similar figure of $600 per household. But the average conceals the distribution. The Yale Budget Lab found that the burden of tariffs, expressed as a share of post-tax and transfer income, falls on the lowest income decile at a rate approximately 3 times higher than on the highest income decile. 1.1% of post-tax income for the bottom 10% versus 0.4% for the top 10%. In dollar terms, the bottom decile pays roughly $400, and the highest income decile pays roughly $1,800. But as a share of what you actually have to spend, the bottom pays nearly 3 times more. This is what economists call a regressive tax. It is a tax that takes a bigger share of income from the people who have less of it. And it is called a hidden tax specifically because it does not appear as a line item on your paycheck. It appears as a higher price on the shelf at the hardware store, a higher cost for the appliance you needed to replace, a higher bill for the car parts. The mechanism of collection is invisible. You pay it every time you buy something that contains an imported component. You do not see the tariff, you see the price. The Center for American Progress estimated in September 2025 that the Trump administration's tariffs are on track to cost the typical household approximately $2,400 per year in additional costs under the full tariff regime. The Trump tariffs represented, before the Supreme Court's February 2026 ruling limiting IEEPA-based tariffs, the largest U.S. tax increase as a percent of GDP since 1993, according to the Tax Foundation. After the ruling, the remaining tariffs still amount to an average tax increase of $600 per household in 2026. That $600 falls heaviest on the people who can least afford it. The third component is the interest rate tax. This is the one that the woman with the $4,000 credit card balance understands most viscerally, even if she does not think of it as a tax on her income. As of Q4 2025, Americans' total credit card balance reached $1.277 trillion. The highest figure since the Federal Reserve Bank of New York began tracking consumer debt in 1999. It has since crossed $1.3 trillion in early 2026. Credit card balances have risen by $507 billion since Q1 2021, a 66% increase in 5 years. Americans owe $350 billion more on credit cards than the pre-pandemic record set in Q4 2019. The average annual percentage rate on credit cards accruing interest is 21.52%. As of Q1 2026, according to the Federal Reserve's G19 Consumer Credit Report. New credit card offers average 23.75% APR today. Total consumer debt has climbed past $5.1 trillion. Total household debt, including mortgages, stands at $18.19 trillion, according to Equifax data as of April 2026. Approximately 60% of credit card users in America carry a balance from 1 month to the next, according to the New York Fed. That means 60% of the 175 million people who have credit cards in the United States are paying 21% annual interest on balances that, for many of them, are growing rather than shrinking. Because the interest charge each month exceeds what they can afford to pay above the minimum, 105 million Americans in a debt loop from which the mathematics of compound interest at 21% makes escape extremely difficult. The interest rate on a credit card is approximately 3 times the interest rate on a 30-year mortgage. It is a structure that punishes the people who need short-term liquidity most, which is the middle and working class, far more than it punishes the wealthy, who can pay credit card balances in full because they have the savings to do so. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York's researchers said explicitly in their February 2026 press call, "You see evidence consistent with a K-shaped economy. Some groups are really struggling." The K-shape is the shape of the hidden tax in graphical form. The top of the K goes up, the bottom of the K goes down. The people at the top have their wealth in assets that appreciate, stocks, real estate, private equity, that compound positively over time. The people in the middle and below have their obligations, mortgages, car loans, student loans, credit cards, compounding negatively at interest rates ranging from 6% to 24%. Both groups are experiencing compound interest, but the direction is opposite. The fourth component is the policy tax. This is the most complex and the most politically charged, but the data is the data, and the data is unambiguous. The Big Beautiful Bill, signed into law on July 4th, 2025, is projected by the Congressional Budget Office to lower average household resources for the poorest 10% of Americans by 3.1% per year, equivalent to approximately $1,200 per year during the period 2026 through 2034. Resources for the richest 10%, by contrast, would increase by 2.7%, or $13,600, according to the same CBO analysis. The tax structure as a whole has been modified over multiple decades in ways that have concentrated the benefit of tax reductions at the top. The top marginal tax rate in 1962 was 91%. By 2026, it is 37%. The capital gains tax rate, which governs how income from investments is taxed, tops out at 20%, significantly below the 37% top rate for ordinary income. This means that a fund manager earning $100 million in carried interest pays a lower tax rate than a teacher earning $70,000 in salary. Yale's Budget Lab has estimated that IRS funding cuts pushed through since 2025 will result in $861 billion in decreased revenue over the next 10 years, mostly due to taxes not paid by the very wealthy who face reduced audit risk. In 2019, a study by economists Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zucman found that the average effective tax rate paid by the richest 400 families in the United States was 23%, more than a percentage point lower than the 24.2% paid by the bottom half of American households. When state and local taxes are added to the federal picture, the regressive structure becomes even more apparent. Sales taxes and property taxes take a higher percentage of income from middle and lower income households than from the wealthy, because the wealthy spend a smaller fraction of their income on taxable consumption. The policy tax does not appear on any single document. It is the cumulative effect of legislative decisions made over decades that shaped who bears the burden and who captures the benefit when the government collects and distributes a $38.86 trillion debt load. The interest on that debt currently costs the Treasury $11 billion per week, 15% of all federal spending, going to service existing obligations before a single dollar reaches education, healthcare, infrastructure, or any of the programs that the middle class depends on. Now, let us bring these four components together into the single picture they create. The woman with the $4,000 credit card balance earns $68,000 per year. That places her roughly at the median income for American households. Over the past 4 years, her nominal wages have grown about 17%. But prices on the specific things she buys have grown about 21%. Real decline in purchasing power, 3 to 4%. Tariff costs in 2026, approximately $600 in additional consumer prices she will pay on goods she was already buying. Credit card interest. If she carries her $4,000 balance for a year at 22%, she pays approximately $880 in interest, which is money she earns through work and then hands directly to a financial institution as the cost of being short of cash between paychecks. Her healthcare premium, if she's purchasing through the ACA marketplace, may have risen substantially this year with the expiration of enhanced premium tax credits. Her food bill is up 14% on beef alone. What she's experiencing is not bad luck. It is not a failure of personal finance discipline. It is the mathematical output of a system in which four separate mechanisms extract value from the middle of the income distribution and deliver it, through different channels, to the top. The purchasing power tax, the tariff tax, the interest rate tax, the policy tax. Each of these mechanisms operates differently. Each has different political constituencies defending it. Each is invisible enough in isolation that the person experiencing all four simultaneously cannot easily identify what is happening or name the thing that is making her chest feel tight. But together, they explain a specific and verifiable fact. The middle 60% of American income earners have watched their share of national wealth fall from 37% in 1990 to 26% today. An 11 percentage point transfer of national wealth share out of the hands of the people who consider themselves middle class. The World Inequality Report 2026 stated something that deserves to be repeated with exact precision. The wealthiest 0.001% of people, fewer than 60,000 individuals on Earth, control 3 times more wealth than half of humanity combined. The concentration is not just American, it is global. But the United States is the country that has the most detailed data, the most transparent Federal Reserve reporting, the most comprehensive picture of exactly how this transfer has worked over the specific period from 1989 to 2025. And here is the dilemma that sits at the center of everything this video has laid out. The four mechanisms of the hidden tax are not accidental. They were not designed by any single conspirator in any single room. They emerged from thousands of individual policy decisions, each made with a stated rationale, each defended by serious people with serious arguments. Inflation is a side effect of monetary policy designed to maintain employment. Tariffs are a tool of trade policy designed to protect domestic industry. Credit card interest rates reflect risk pricing in free markets. Tax policy reflects democratic choices made through legislative processes. Each of these explanations contains truth. And together, they produce a system in which the wealthiest 1% holds as much wealth as the bottom 90%, and the trend line is moving in a direction that is not reversed in 35 years of Federal Reserve measurement. The specific question that the data creates is not whether the middle class is being taxed through invisible mechanisms. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the Yale University Budget Lab, the Tax Foundation, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Congressional Budget Office, and the New York Fed's own economists have all confirmed it from different angles. The question is whether the people experiencing the extraction understand the mechanism clearly enough to distinguish it from their own supposed failures of financial discipline. Because the most powerful feature of a hidden tax is that the person paying it often blames themselves for the consequences. The woman with the $4,000 credit card balance does not think of herself as the victim of a regressive tariff system, and a compound interest structure, and a purchasing power erosion mechanism, and a policy architecture that has systematically reduced her share of national wealth over 3 decades. She thinks of herself as someone who needs to make a budget and stick to it. She is solving the wrong problem. Or rather, she is solving a real problem in the wrong place at the level of individual behavior, when the problem is structural and systemic and visible in Federal Reserve data that shows the middle class has lost 11 percentage points of national wealth share since 1990. In 1971, 61% of Americans were considered middle class according to Pew Research. By 2023, the figure had fallen to 51%. The shrinkage is structural. The middle class is not failing to maintain its membership through poor decisions. The membership cost is rising faster than middle class incomes can support it. Bank of America data from December 2025 showed that higher income households' wage growth was 3%. Middle income households' wage growth was 1.5%. Low income households' wage growth was 1.1%. The divergence in wage growth, where the people who need the most support from wage growth are getting the least of it, is another expression of the K-shaped economy that the Federal Reserve researchers identified explicitly in February 2026. The savings buffer that many middle and lower income families built during the pandemic years through enhanced benefits and reduced spending has been effectively consumed. Federal Reserve and S&P Global data confirm that for the bottom 40% of income earners, that pandemic savings buffer has essentially vanished. The median savings account balance for the bottom half of American households is measured in hundreds of dollars. The average credit card APR is measured at 22%. The mathematics of what happens when a household with limited savings faces an unexpected expense and turns to a credit card charging 22% to absorb it is not complicated. It is a debt loop from which compound interest at 22% makes exit increasingly difficult with each passing month. The specific implications of the hidden tax for the 80% of Americans who are not in the top quintile of wealth owners are visible in real time if you know where to look. 4.8% of all outstanding U.S. household debt is in some stage of delinquency, the highest level since 2017, according to Federal Reserve Bank of New York data from February 2026. Student loan serious delinquency has reached 9.6%. Total consumer debt has passed $5.1 trillion. Total household debt is $18.19 trillion. At the end of the middle class, as the majority experience of American economic life, is not a future event being predicted by alarmed analysts. It is a past event being documented by the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Yale University Budget Lab, the New York Fed, and every other institution that tracks wealth distribution in the United States. The majority of Americans who used to claim middle-class membership have watched their collective share of national wealth shrink by 11 percentage points over 35 years. The wealthiest 1% has gained 9 percentage points of wealth share over the same period. The numbers that describe where this goes from here, if none of the four mechanisms change, are equally straightforward. The inflation running at 3.3% in March 2026, higher than the 2.4% from the month before, is adding pressure to purchasing power that has not recovered from the 20% cumulative inflation of 2021 through 2024. Tariff costs of $500 to $600 per household are falling heaviest on the income brackets least able to absorb them. Credit card balances at 22% APR are compounding in the wrong direction for the 60% of cardholders who carry a balance month to month. And the policy architecture that has shaped tax collection and government spending for 4 decades continues to transfer the debt service cost of $38.86 trillion in national obligations toward a middle class whose share of national wealth is already at a record low. There is a woman somewhere in America with a $4,000 credit card balance and a chest-tight feeling she does not have a name for. She is not failing. She is being failed. The mechanism failing her has 4 components, all operating simultaneously, all invisible on any single document, all contributing to the specific Federal Reserve, finding that the top 1% now owns as much as the bottom 90% combined. The end of the middle class is not coming. It is being documented quarterly in Federal Reserve data releases that measure the wealth share of the group that used to be the defining feature of the American economic experience. The wealthiest 1%, $55 trillion. The bottom 90%, $55 trillion. 1% equals 90%. That is the ratio that the Federal Reserve confirmed in January 2026. That is the end of what the middle class was. And the hidden tax that produced it is still running. Every day. In every grocery store, in every credit card statement, in every healthcare premium notice, in every tariff-priced appliance, in every policy decision that makes the audit rate on millionaires lower than the audit rate on working people claiming the earned income tax credit, she is still carrying the balance. It is still growing. She still does not have a word for what is taking her money. Now she does. 4 of them. Purchasing power, tariff, interest rate, policy, 4 components of one hidden tax, paid by 80%, received by 20%. Documented in the Federal Reserve data and confirmed in every economic research institution that looked at the same numbers from the same period and arrived at the same conclusion. The middle class is not failing. The hidden tax is working exactly as designed,